This tutorial is about setting up Ubuntu 20.04 from a Windows platform, and we're going to be using a well-known tool, PuTTY, to create some SSH keys and accessing Ubuntu with PuTTY. But we're also going to be using a software that's new to me, and that's MobaXTerm. And this MobaXTerm tool has a lot of really great features, and they're both free to get and use on the Windows operating system. So starting with a fresh installation of Ubuntu 20.04 that has a public IP address, and you may have a username or password at this point, or you may also have a SSH key that's already set up to log in with. But that's where you need to start out from, unless you're doing this on a local network, and in which case you would just use your local IP address, and everything else will be the same. So I'm going to provide this line-by-line text document for you in the description, and you can just download it and save it to your desktop, and then at that point you can just follow along. So let's begin. The first thing we're going to do on our desktop is create a folder named keys, and this is where we're going to store our public and private keys. Then next, since we're using a mobile version of MobaXTerm, we're going to create a folder for that on the desktop as well. Next, we're going to configure this text file. So there's three pieces of information that you're going to need to start off with, that we're going to quickly edit this text file. And if you're using Notepad++, that would be ideal. It's another free software that runs on Windows and is really useful just as a basic text file editor. You should not do this in any type of editor that has auto correction of any sort. Definitely not Word, WordPad, or anything like that. You want it to be a straight text editor with find and replace function. So the first thing you're going to start off with is the keyword I'm using here is organization name, but you could also use like a project name or really any name, and this name is going to be replacing some lines in the commands that are going to name your SSH keys. So essentially this is just going to be the name of your SSH key, and then the next thing is going to be the username that you want to create as a sudo user and the IP address of the server. And we're just going to do some find and replace, which is an easy way to take this generic form that's just a note, just a text file, and we're going to just find and replace these keywords with what needs to be done, and which will give us, we're going to refine and replace these keywords, which will give us the commands that you can just copy and paste when setting up your server. So my organization name here is Starlight. My username that does exist on my server is Bear, and the IP address of my server. So go ahead and copy the open squiggly brackets, organization name, close squiggly brackets, and find and replace that with your organization name and hit replace all. And then the next, do the same thing with your username. And the IP address. Next, click on this link, and we're going to download MobaXTerm. So just copy or click on the link, however it's working for you. And there's a free edition, and just go ahead and download that. And it'll come in a zip file. So then just put that zip file into your MobaXTerm folder that you created on your desktop. Next, we're going to download PuTTY, regular PuTTY, and then PuTTY Gen, which is a key generator that works with the PuTTY SSH tool. One place you can get PuTTY Gen that you know is a good secure place is right from the Microsoft Store if you're using modern Microsoft, which I'm guessing you are. Windows, I should say. So in your MobaXTerm folder, go ahead and unzip the MobaXTerm package and just double click on the executable, and we're going to run that and set it up. Okay, go to Settings, Configuration, and General. And change the persistent home directory to the MobaXTerm folder you just created. Also, the persistent root directory. And then it's going to restart. If you have any pop-ups that are blocked by Windows Defender or another program, go ahead and just allow MobaXTerm to work on the network as it's asking to. Then we're going to start off a new session with session and then shell. And this is going to create a Linux shell right from MobaXTerm without having to install Linux. Linux is going to be running within MobaXTerm, allowing you to have a Linux command line. And so just copy and paste in touch test, and it's going to give you a pop-up screen asking you if you want what you want your right click to do. And touch test is just a command to create a file within that folder to test that it's working. Next, on that same command line, we're going to run this SSH Key Gen command, and we're going to go ahead and create a SSH key right from inside MobaXTerm. Again, we haven't connected to the server yet. This is just Linux running inside of MobaXTerm. So I'm going to create my passphrase for this SSH key. And but you don't have to. You can leave it open. Okay, so after you run that, ensure that you have the name of your public, the name of the key that ends in PUB, and the one without an extension name. And the one without the extension name is going to be your private key. And then it'd be a good idea to create a zip file storing those keys, because since, for example, that pub key is in a text file, it wouldn't be inconceivable to edit that, but you definitely want to keep the originals in their original form, and a zip file is the best way to do that. I used 7-zip here, but you can use regular zip. 7-zip is another free program that you can use on the Windows platform that is trusted and very useful. Okay, and this is using I'm doing the same thing here with the PuTTY Gen. PuTTY Gen generator, which is going to generate a key that works in a way that PuTTY wants to use it. So these two keys, one's going to be, the first one we created is just going to be from a generic SSH command line using something like MobaXTerm, but with PuTTY, you need to, PuTTY prefers to have a .ppk private key. So after we've successfully pinged our server, go up into MobaXTerm and click on the session icon, and next the SSH icon, and in the remote host box you're going to be putting in your IP address, your IPv4 IP address. In the specify user box, you're going to put in your username. Hit OK. And since my server is using a password instead of a pre-built SSH key, I'm going to put in my password. And I hit no to save my password there. And so we're going to be editing the hostname file. And you could create that. If it was really long, it'd be a good idea to shorten up your name. Make it short yet useful. And so next we're going to run the update command, and after that runs we're going to run the upgrade command, and then we're going to reboot. Okay, after rebooting, you can start with the ping command from your local terminal within MobaXTerm just to see when your server is back online. And it'll sit there and repeat. Okay, now that we know that we have a consistent reply, let's go back to Ubuntu and restart our session. Log back in. And we've established SSH again. And I'm just pinging live.com to make sure that I have a good internet connection from inside of Linux. Next, we're going to be adding a user. Next, we're going to use the command su bear to switch user to bear. And now we're going to type in our password that we gave to our user bear. And when I run this command, it should allow me to edit this file using nano. And I'm going to add this line, which is going to make it where this user does not have to type in the password anymore after they are logged in. And then we press Control X and a Y to save the file. Now the CD home, we go to the home directory of the user bear, and we're going to make a directory called .ssh. The dot makes the directory hidden normally. Now we use the chmod command to give the SSH folder its proper access. And now you're going to come over to your keys folder, and the .pub file that was created when we created our key, we're going to open that up in a text editor, copy in the public key, and we're going to save that. We're going to save that as a text file called authorized key. Then we restart the SSH service, and we're going to use MobaXTerm to create a new session, a new SSH session, to test out and connect using the new user bear and also with the SSH key, the private SSH key that we created. So from advanced settings, use private key, navigate to your keys folder, and select the Starlight key, not the pub one, but the one that does not have pub at the end, and that's your private key. And since I gave a passphrase, I have to put in my passphrase at this point. But if you did not enter one, you won't have this. Now we just established SSH connection using the user bear with an SSH key. We did not type in a password at all. I'm going to establish a new SSH connection using PuTTY now, in addition to MobaXTerm, just to establish that I have more than one line of communication to my server. So now we also have PuTTY connected to that same server using the same username, showing that we can connect with multiple terminals using the same username at the same time. So move on to the next line. Come back to your SSH connection. And we're going to take this SSHD config file and we're going to make a copy of it in case we make a mistake when editing this file. We can always refer back to the original. And so now I've got nano open. I've got this file open with nano, and we're going to start editing our SSH config page. The default port is 22, and anything with a pound in front of it that has a value, that's the default value, so it doesn't have to be explicitly stated. But I'm going to make it to where SSH is listening on port 22 and port 55444 until I can confirm that 55444 is working, and then I will get rid of port 22 and change my connections there. Another useful tool from the command line is nmap. And if you haven't installed nmap, you can do so with sudo apt install nmap. And then we're going to be using nmap to check the state of our SSH port and also other ports that it'll show us if they're open, which could potentially be a vulnerability for your server. We want to confirm that SSH port 22 is open and also that port 55444 is open. So at this point, it is closed. And that is because after we edited, we did not do a SSH restart. So that's the next thing that we need to do. So sudo service SSH restart will reload SSH with the configuration changes that we made. Run our nmap command again, and now the state of that port is open, which means it's listening on that port. Next, back to MobaXTerm session. We're going to create a new session. Same IP address, but this time we're going to modify the port that it is running on, it is connecting to. We're going to use the same private key that we did before, but we're going to change port 55444. We're going to change to port 55444. Okay, we're back in, and we've confirmed that that port is open. And so then we can go and shut off port 22, which is the default port. And the reason we want to block port 22, it just is the common port for SSH. It's the default port, and it just stops certain scanners from listing that as an open port. And now we have SSH on a random port. So we're gonna, now we've used nmap again to ping our local host, which is the computer that we're running on, and it shows that port 22 is still open. So again, anytime you make an edit to your SSHD file, the SSH configuration file, you have to do a service restart, and then it will be closed. So that is to confirm that port 22 is closed for business. Next, we're going to set up the UFW firewall. Let's start with the command UFW reset. This is going to clear out any rules that were there before, and we're going to add our first rule, which is allow port 55444. Next, we're going to enable our firewall. It was not enabled before, so we are going to enable UFW. And next, we're going to restart the SSH connection server, and again test port 55444 to ensure that our firewall has not blocked that. But one good thing about having a second SSH session open is, even though you may restart SSH server, if that session is already established, you can still make connection, or you can still make changes to your server, because it doesn't kill those already established SSH connections. So I've established connection using my original username with Ubuntu. And now we're going to continue to change configurations on this config file with a secondary application running with an established session in case we mess something up here. We can go back and make changes with the established connection on PuTTY. So we're going to change permit root login to no, and this is going to kill any root user login. So using the Control W command, we can search within Nano for the lines that we want to edit, and we search password authentication and change that to no. Now we're only going to allow one single user, and that is Bear, to connect to SSH, editing it just to ensure that we were able to save that file. Next, we're going to test our connection to our initial sudo user, and we should not be able to for two reasons. One is that we cannot establish a connection with a password, and we can also only connect with the user Bear. And we've established that other logins are not available anymore. We can only use Bear. So now I'm going to go back up and edit my session with the login Bear. And I just need to change the port to 55444, as that's the only difference. I still have my private key in there. And double click, and we should be right in. And so now we've edited our SSH configuration file, and we've confirmed that Bear can log in and that our other users cannot. So congratulations if you're able to follow on that, and now you have a hardened, updated version of Ubuntu 20.04 ready to connect via SSH with key login.